attachment theory. So attachment theory is a really interesting area, but then there are these disorders of attachment where things have gone wrong. That can take the shape of being inconsistently available, so that's called anxious-ambivalent. As an adult, they can have a conflicted set of desires about attachment. I want to be loved, I want to be loved. No, don't love me, that's too much. I don't. So they get themselves into an intimate relationship and then they want to run. The avoidant group is another interesting one. Obviously, they are more prone towards being more detached or distant in relationship. I'll tell you an interesting mismatch, if you like, is when you get an avoidantly attached individual having a relationship with a anxious-ambivalent attached individual. All they know is they have this pattern of behaving all the time. It's happened in lots of relationships, but I don't know what to do about it.
Because it's a repeated thing. It follows them. Unless they fix it.
Yeah.
This is Between the Sheets by MHC, a podcast about sex, intimacy and relationships.
So the way we bond with others isn't just about chemistry. It's shaped by deep-seated patterns. Some of us thrive on closeness, while others instinctively like to keep their distance. But what happens when these patterns start affecting one's relationship? So whether you're secure or anxious or avoidant or somewhere in between, your relationship attachment style can define how you form connections. Is it the key to lasting romance? Let's unravel the unconscious dynamics and see what shapes intimacy. And I wanted to ask you, Ranil, how does one's family origin and socialization, how does that affect relationships and sexual dysfunction?
Well, when we used to grow up, we're the last generation to grow up without the influence of the smartphone and social media. And that in your hand global connection. So when we grew up, and every generation before us, as a matter of fact, there was a little microcosm of influence from our family of origin, our neighbourhood, perhaps our church, our schools.
And that made you the person you were.
Yeah, that's right. So you sort of evolved in this kind of almost like a little vacuum. You weren't really connected with the entire world, and you had your little friend group at school, and that was that.
You might have a pen pal in France, but that was about it.
I remember that too. Tried that for a while. So really limited exposure, and I think that was a easier way to develop for children, because you're not so confused and at a time that your brain isn't ready to understand the entire world. And if we think about that reality, which is still the case for kids of today and the future, but there's just so many other overlays that make it more complex, but just that reality. The starting thing is children learn more about how to engage the world and who they are from modelling, as it's called in child development. So watching their parents, how do they behave towards each other, how intimate and close are they, how distant are they, what's their sexual relationship like. Kids always do notice these things. And then by talking to friends and the contact with cousins and all of that sort of stuff, to learn how to navigate these issues of relationship and intimacy. So there's a huge amount that is cultural and societal, based on how you grew up, what your values were, what was modelled for you in your family of origin and neighbourhood of origin, and so on.
That's your sort of peer group that you'd normally naturally aspire to be like, and
Yeah.
which gets thrown with a phone.
Yeah. So, I mean, even at that level, though, there's, sometimes we're very lucky that we had modelling by parents that was very healthy and constructive and so on. And to be open and free and healthy in our relationships with intimacy and sexuality. But unfortunately, traditionally, there's so many people that were brought up in manners that weren't helpful to be free and liberated about their thinking. I think of whilst I do believe Christianity and Catholicism added value, I'm not practicing anything really these days, but as a child I was brought up as a Catholic. My dad was a Buddhist, so a bit of a mix, but the traditional Christian and Catholic teaching was really very unhelpful, I would have to say, when it comes to issues to do with intimacy and sexual liberation and freedom and not having baggage around that area. I think it's an area that religion has messed a lot of people up.
Yeah, kind of made it shameful, haven't they? In a way?
Shame, guilt, all of that stuff was wrapped up in sexual expression, which is a real shame.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very hard to unshake that forever. And then, your parents, how did they interact in terms of intimacy and displaying affection towards each other? As kids, did you see your parents hugging and kissing and holding hands and being close and intimate and so on? Because that's fundamentally important for your models of how relationships should function, and it affects kids more and young adults more than anyone really realises.
Yeah.
I think more powerfully than anything.
I would think so.
So we're very much vulnerable to how lucky we are where we were, what we were born into, the setting, I suppose. So that's very powerful. But then when you overlay the reality of now, which is that there's this constant influence in a child's life from when they're very young, with a in-your-hand connection to the entire planet, of all sorts of other models, and good and bad, of how relationships should look and how sex should look, and models of behaviour and pornography, and all of these things are going to adversely colour and what would otherwise be a normal, just a more organic development of beliefs and
normal
behaviours.
Breaking the normal, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got guys in their teens coming to us that need help because they can't get an erection, but then through sex counselling we discover that they've been addicted to porn since they were 9 years old or what have you, and they've just their vision of sex is completely different to what it is in the world. It's they're living it through a porn video, and so they get a girlfriend that they meet down the road who's a nice girl and vanilla, maybe quite type girl, and there's just no excitement there whatsoever, so they can't get it up, So I can completely see how that happens. What are the different types of attachment styles, and how do they affect relationships, intimacy? What would you say?
Let me just to finish on that last point, though. I think the other aspect is there's so much pressure, I think, as well, because of the social media component, for women to look a particular way, to be super sexy, everything's highly sexualized and so on. So for women and young girls, it's a lot of pressure to be this, this sort of TV online kind of sexualized person, which is not really in their best interests or really the best interests for men either. And as you say, it desensitizes you from just normal interaction and relationship development and intimacy and so on. So social media is a big thing. There's always that hanging over everyone's sort of perspectives on life, society and relationships. But yeah, coming back to attachment theory. So attachment theory is a really interesting area. First, I think the term was coined by Thomas Bowlby back in the 60s, and it was really around, initially the central concept was around mother-child interactions, but the more contemporary understanding is it's parent-child interactions, and not just the mother, but the mother is usually, in most social settings, the primary carer to start off with in the child's early development. And the essence of it is that through thousands and thousands of interactions, the child learns whether the world is a safe place, whether people will be there for them when they're in distress, and whether they're worthy of love and care when they need it. So if you just imagine the dynamics, every time a child cries, mum or dad picks it up and soothes it. And that happens thousands and thousands of times. So in that one example, the child is learning that if I'm upset, people will be there to help me. I am worthy of love. And it's also learning emotional regulation. So really upset, crying, screaming, tantrum, for example, parents just calm that whole thing down and they're self-regulating with the help of a parent. But what happens when that happens thousands of times, the child internalizes that skill and learns to self-regulate. So when they get too distressed, they can calm down. So when you get disordered attachment, one of the real problems is emotional dysregulation, because people haven't learnt how to self-regulate, internalizing that process. So healthy and secure attachment is where parents have been responsive to the child's distress and needs as and when they need it, but not smothering and being overwhelmed by that, just appropriately attuned to the child's needs.
Yeah.
And the child then slowly learns that the world is a safe place and I can explore. So the child, you'll see this in child attachment experiments, where the child will keep proximity to the parent and then will slowly go off and explore. But if they get distressed, they'll come back and seek security and attachment and get soothed and then go off and explore. So the world's a safe place, I can go and explore, and if something bad happens, people will help me and I'll be able to self-regulate.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing. But then there are these disorders of attachment where things have gone wrong, and that could be because of parents not having been raised in a secure attachment themselves. So we call that transgenerational attachment disorder.
Yeah.
It's kind of passed on, and because they weren't brought up with adequate parent skills. And so that can take the shape of being inconsistently available. So that's called anxious-ambivalent. So where the parents were there sometimes, but not there sometimes. So sometimes neglect, sometimes there, but not based on the child's needs. So they would just swoop in, and because they feel really guilty, they were absent for ages, maybe because of depression or substance or whatever. And then the child's neglected a lot of the time. But then when the child's not needing care, they're feeling guilty and smothering them. So there's this kind of, it's not attuned to the child's needs kind of thing going on. And the child wants care and love, doesn't get it, and then when it gets it, it's feeling smothered because it's not actually seeking it kind of thing. You know what I mean? So they have this conflicted, as an adult, they can have a conflicted set of desires about attachment. I want to be loved. I want to be loved. No, don't love me. Don't love me. That's too much. I don't. So they get themselves into an intimate relationship, and then they want to run. They feel uncomfortable in that setting of love and connectedness. They want to run or self-sabotage, sabotage the relationship.
Yeah.
It's a very common problem, that one. And then the next category is called avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment's a bit easier to understand. It's essentially where there was a lot more neglect. And the child learns that, generally speaking, people can't be relied on in life. If I need to fix things, I need to do it myself. And they find it a little bit harder to be intimate and close and trusting and vulnerable in relationships because they've got the armour on.
Yeah, because the vulnerability bonds you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes you closer. Yeah. That feels uncomfortable because they didn't get that as a child. And then the last category is called disorganised. So that's where trauma has been in place. So it's not just a dysfunctional attachment. It's like the child was exposed to domestic violence or physical abuse or emotional abuse or tantrums from parents and things like that. Very disorganised and very hard to fix those ones as well.
Yeah. Goodness me. I bet you see some horror stories, don't you, really? You've got to fix. Yeah. Okay, and what is the attachment theory? How does that affect relationships in general?
Well, I suppose, if you just think about those categories, obviously if you're securely attached, navigating relationships is going to be easier. You'll be able to be intimate and close with people when you want to be and they want to be. And also, when you're apart, it's okay because you hold that attachment model of security that I am lovable and people will be there for me if I need them. That's held in your head. So you don't have abandonment terrors. You can be apart and still love the person and know that they will trust that they will be loyal and, stay with you and so on.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fill you with that abandonment terror. Whereas that the anxious-ambivalent types of attachment they can struggle with. They may need to be near the person all the time.
They're more susceptible to having problems.
To being anxious and worried or desperately clinging and then not feeling comfortable in that setting, and more vulnerable to abandonment terrors as well. Like if their husband or wife is away, they might be worried they're cheating on them, or anxious that maybe they're going to leave them, and these kinds of things. So it's a very difficult dynamic to have in a relationship, and of course that's going to affect intimacy and sexual function as well.
Yeah. And so if somebody suffered something like that, they can sort of work on themselves, they can get some psychiatric help, some counselling or what have you. When is it, when do they is the time for them to draw a line in the sand and think, well, this hasn't worked, and then look for perhaps something that the Evolution Clinic would help them with?
Yeah, well, I would, especially for relationship and attachment disorders, relationship problems, sexual dysfunction and attachment disorders, I strongly recommend doing therapy to start off with. It's the necessary first base. You've got to understand what is going on. A lot of people aren't privy to this information. All they know is they have this pattern of behaving all the time. It's happened in lots of relationships, but I don't know what to do about it. So
because it's a repeated thing, it follows them. Unless they fix it.
Yeah. So doing intensive therapy is a starting position to understand where this comes from, how did this happen, what are my patterns and vulnerabilities around this area, and where do they come from, so that you can start trying to do something yourself. And then obviously bringing in your partner for relationship therapy is a really good starting position. I think relationship therapy is something that's not done enough. Very few people invest the time in their relationships for the betterment of both parties. But especially when you've got these issues, I think it's really important. But we do see lots of relational benefits coming from psychedelic therapies for trauma, because it's usually a trauma disorder that's resulted in these severely disturbed attachments. So the person relearning that the world is not a safe place, that the world is a safe place now. It's not like their childhood. It's like being frozen in time for someone with trauma. Yeah, you're sort of still stuck in this state of fear and terror, like something bad's going to happen. So the medicines and the therapy can be very effective in relearning that you are a interesting, lovable person, and you are worthy of love, and you can love yourself and appreciate your own self, and that people can, be trusted, and people will do mean the best for you. And that's a experiential, emotional experiential journey that happens through the medicine therapies for some people, where it works, and it doesn't work for everyone, as I said. But it is we wouldn't say that it's a treatment for attachment or relationship issues. What we'd say is that it's a treatment for people who have suffered significant trauma, who are then having relationship and attachment issues.
I see,
And the avoidant group is another interesting one. Obviously, they are more prone towards being more detached or distant in relationships. So obviously that makes it more difficult to have meaningful, intimate, sexual and close relationships.
Yeah, this is perhaps someone that really plays the field when they're very young, and then that becomes the norm, and so then they struggle to sort of settle down. Would that be a candidate?
Yeah. I mean, you see that story a lot, don't you?
You do, now, absolutely. Especially because a sexual encounter is super relaxed. It's almost like you almost don't even need to sort of introduce yourself to that person now. It's just,
I'll tell you an interesting mismatch, if you like, is when you get an avoidantly attached individual having a relationship with a anxious-ambivalent attached individual, because the avoidant person is just in la-la land about intimacy and emotional intelligence and needs of the other and so on, and they kind of just go about their life doing their thing. But the other person is feeling rejected and abandoned, and the lack of connection is really painful for them, because it's also triggering their childhood experience. So just like mum or dad wasn't there and was unavailable, my husband or wife is not there and unavailable. So they're reacting really a lot to, it's a psychodynamic concept, but they're reacting to their childhood relational.
So they're both broken,
experiences.
really, aren't they? They're both
in
need therapy.
very different ways, and it's a real mismatch to try and make it work. So again, understanding these things is the starting position through therapy.
Yeah, I can imagine. That is a tricky one, I'm sure. No, I think it's very, very interesting. And so how do attachment styles manifest in casual sex, for example? How can there be a problem there?
Well, I mean, casual sex is an interesting area, isn't it? I mean, it's on the rise without a doubt. I don't know statistics on this area, but one would imagine with the advent of dating apps, and there are so many of them, it's so different to when other previous generations were growing up. There's this ability to engage in casual sex, which has become very normalised now. I think lots of people do it and utilise technology to engage in that behaviour. And
people talk about this guy or this girl. They're not even using names, a lot of them.
Yeah. And and I think it is an area for more that would see more overly represented people with disorganised attachment and avoidant attachment, because secure and more ambivalent would find it generally more of an empty exercise. They might try it, but then not feel good about it. And I think it's just interesting the direction that this has gone in, where so many more people are engaging in very casual multiple partner sex encounters. I'm not saying it's good or bad or there's anything wrong with it per se, but it is a societal trend that's increased significantly, and it's interesting to consider how healthy or beneficial that will be for people in the long run. Obviously, engaging in that area for a while is one thing, but then if it becomes a habit or a pattern over a long period of time, how meaningful or rewarding or gratifying or so on will that be?
Which is why you can find plenty of people in their 40s and 50s that never got into a serious relationship, and that's just how they live their lives, just casually.
You do see people though that do it for a fair number of years and then stop.
Yeah.
I think there's a developmental trajectory to it as well. Erickson talked about different developmental stages in life. There's people, I'm sure that you thought, oh my God, they'll never stop, and suddenly they have. You know? But I think what's happening there is it meets a need for a period of time, and eventually at some stage, maybe 40s or 50s, it starts feeling more meaningless, and the person kind of yearns for something a bit more, something a bit more meaningful, something a bit more connected. And the other area around that I think that you miss out on if you don't engage in more meaningful longer-term relationships is humans do get satisfaction and fulfillment, longer-term fulfillment, from longer stories where they invest time in lots of things and that work hard at things, and then they flourish
more
and grow.
fulfilling.
Yeah, as opposed to instant gratification. It's never been something that is gives you that longer term sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, whereas and long-term relationships are like that. Although I am not an advocate of long-term relationships staying together when they're clearly not working. That's another really interesting area of society, I think. If you look at separation and divorce rates, about 50% of relationships end in separation.
That's right.
And but you can just imagine how many of the 50% that stayed together, though, are actually relatively happy and
that haven't done counselling, for example. I've seen couples split up all the time. Several couples I know that split up, and that happens all the time. But they've not worked on themselves, and it's a shame because the grass is always greener. They end up in another relationship that's still broken.
Yeah,
and really, they had a good partner they should have worked on. Really.
Well, but also there's I think working at it and trying to work it out is really important. But I guess the other point I'd raise is if it's not working and it's not working out, then staying together isn't good for anyone. Really.
No, especially not for the kids to see.
Yeah, and I think there's this really interesting and somewhat pessimistic perspective I have on this, having been through divorce myself. Relationships are the most incredibly difficult. Gratifying, intimate and sexual relationships are one of the greatest challenges of life, really. I don't mean in the short term, I mean to pull it off in the long term.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's a miracle when it does work, right? And if you look at the failure rates of this, if we look at 50% of most relationships end in separation, that's a failure rate, right? And then if you look at the other 50% that supposedly stay together, how many of those, that 50%, are healthy, living a reasonably happy, gratifying life together as a couple?
Or do they just exist because they're in a religion or something?
Or are they just, miserable or not happy but don't want to separate? Because most people don't separate, right? Like, it takes a lot of guts to separate. It's terrifying. It's the scariest thing you'll ever do, leaving your family and so on. It's incredibly traumatic. So lots of people don't. So I would say of that 50% that are together, only probably 30% or so would be happy and having a reasonably gratifying relationship. So in other words, in relationships, whereas if 20% are really unhappy and fighting and hate each other, that's a fail as well. So if you put that picture together, it means that relationships kind of fail in around 70% of the time.
Yeah,
which is an incredibly high failure rate.
Isn't it?
And the analogy I give is, imagine if someone came to your car salesman and said, "I've got this great new car. It's fantastic. It looks great. Drives like a dream." 70% of them break down. You wouldn't be remotely interested.
You wouldn't buy the car, would you?
But here we are, all signing up for long-term relationships. We don't know really how to navigate them very well. We're not taught this stuff in schools as we should be, and we don't know how to choose wisely for ourselves either in terms of compatibility and so on. It's just complete
no one knows
luck.
their attachment style.
No. So, and then unsurprisingly, it's not really working for 70% of people.
Yeah.
But thankfully, there's always round 2 or 3 and fix the first one or move on.
Which is the concept for married at first sight, isn't it? The experts put you together, and there's some successful marriages coming out of it, which is quite interesting. But
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Between the Sheets. Thanks for joining us. If you're enjoying this podcast, give it a like and subscribe so we can keep creating content you'll love. Check out the description below for links to our Facebook and Instagram pages to get more updates about Men's Health Clinic. And if you're experiencing any bedroom health issues, please feel free to book an appointment with us through the booking links provided. If you have questions or want to start your treatment for sexual dysfunctions, reach out to Men's Health Clinic. We offer free online consultation and provide custom treatments. Take care, everyone, and keep the conversation going between the sheets.